What's going on, y'all? It's J Smo Reviews here, back at it again with another video, man. Bringing you guys another Book'em episode here. We talk about the next best potential matchups for a battler, but this one's a little bit special and a little different because we are talking about a return. As you can see by the title, we're going to be talking about the best potential return matchups for DNA, who has obviously been taking an extended break from battle rap. We're talking about one of the most active legends of all time in battle rap, taking a full year off and then some, because obviously it's not like he battled the 31st of 2023. Whenever he battled Jerry West, he took all of 2024 off, and now it seems like he's leaving clues and hints, talk about, I want to return, I'm thinking about returning. And even today, shout out Frank White, who always is having good dialogue with some of the legends and unspoken heroes in our culture, from battlers to managers, sponsors, etc. Got to talk to DNA a little bit today, and DNA was speaking once again on returning potentially in 2025. I don't believe he gave a concrete on returning in 2025, but spoken more positively on battling than you've heard from him, because anyone that does follow him knows that while he's been gone, he's talked about how refreshing it's felt and how he's not a fan of the state of the culture. He held that sentiment as well, but talked about wanting to get back active in the ring. And I think it's interesting when we talk about a return battle as well, right? Because you can only do a return once, especially when you're someone like DNA that doesn't often take time off like this. Probably the first time I've seen him ever in his career take over a year off. And once you built up that momentum from being away, you only get one shot at that now doubly impactful battle that you get on the way back. And he gave his thoughts on, there's really only one opponent who will be on this list. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that opponent when we find our way to that particular matchup. But I wanted to speak a little bit on that whole return factor and what's tough for a guy like DNA, right? And a lot of these legends that I do these book'ems for have vast resumes, but DNA, who was overly active for a large portion of his career, right? So not only has he faced most legends, most of his top-tier peers, he's also given a ton of shots. There's not really a lot of people in the UM1s or some of those newer classes that he hasn't seen for the most part, especially not people from his era. But I think the third thing that makes DNA's a little bit tougher to do is some of the matchups that haven't happened, it's because he's grown so cool with a battler, obviously outside of the ring, or it just is random or doesn't make sense. So, for example, some matchups that I'm going to tell you right now won't be on here are DNA versus T-Top, right? Where you have them being NWX teammates and like very good friends outside of the ring. So matchup-wise, it's a top tier he hasn't battled, but it's not a matchup that'll make sense. DNA versus Hitman, another one that I think he spoke more directly on in the space earlier today, where, of course, DNA and Hitman would have a great battle, but there's an element of randomness to it, and he's cool with Hitman outside of the ring. Sometimes, even though there's availability in that top-tier matchup, it just doesn't make all that sense. You're not going to see DNA versus John Don. They mentioned Fonz as well, who maybe makes a little bit more sense, but even they are cool outside of the ring and a bit in NWX. So there's a few matchups that either missed its mark if it didn't happen in that golden era of YouTube from like 2012 to around 2015, 2016. It probably just isn't going to happen. And there's a couple potential teammates he had. And also, people will bring up rematches with a guy like this. I know that there's a group out there that would like DNA versus K-Shine, the rematch, because the little bit of drama they had and what Shine has said on his route to a not return of his own for the most part. But there's some things that also go beyond rap where that's just not a matchup that's going to happen. As someone that has watched DNA and his movements and kind of speak on it, that's not something that he's trying to turn into raps. That is something that went a little bit beyond that. That was kind of dealt with the way it was dealt with them giving their perspectives in their respective interviews and platforms. So it's a little bit trickier than your regular battler that might just have matchups available for him. But I think that there's a mix of legends here that might kind of fulfill what he wants in terms of like a return that's powerful. And there also is one particular shot to give that I think if that battler is to make it make sense, it might even be the perfect matchup for him. But that's just kind of my preamble, because I think this is a little bit of a more complex video to make when we're talking matchups for a guy. But without further ado, let's get into those matchups. So starting here at number 5, and anyone that watches my book and videos knows the number 5 spot is one that might be a little bit out there, might be off the wall. It could be random in a sense, but maybe I see a bit more of a vision for it, and that is DNA versus Swamp. And this is one that stylistically I don't think meshes perfectly, and if anything, that might be what makes someone look at the matchup and be like, but I'm looking at newer stars, right, in a sense that he hasn't battled. He has no connection to Swamp in a sense, so it would be a strictly competitive matchup, and it's a matchup that DNA himself mentioned earlier, along with a few others others, but he had said, there's still matchups out there. I haven't battled a guy like Swamp. And when you see Swamp, who is now stepping into more of the star part of his career, where we always knew he had the ability, then I thought he was top tier, but maybe not. I think you could be top tier without being a flat out building, selling out type of star, right? But now you see Swamp's names after all these legacy matches wrapped up with different big matches and more of a demand maybe than ever for him to consistently be on like big spots and in big situations. And I think DNA and Swamp is just simply a battle of two very good guys, drastically different styles. They're good at drastically different things. But I think that they could have just a great competitive battle, and especially if it's something that's on DNA's mind. I think we're at the point with Swamp where we just want to see him versus other legends and versus top-tier rec. And of course, he'll give shots within his schedule the same way DNA made a career of giving overly as many shots within his schedule, right? But I just think they could have a good battle. So maybe it's not in the most high demand, but if we're talking about who are some guys around that DNA could end up battling, I think Swamp is one of those where it wouldn't completely not make sense. Then here at number 4, which for some people will definitely be higher on the list, it is DNA versus Easy the Block Captain. I think that most people might even say this is the most recommended for him. The only problem is DNA saying today, I will not be taking Easy the Block Captain on my return. And this is understandable because there was a point where DNA wanted to battle Easy when it was Suge and John and DNA. I'd say your 3 other legends that while Easy was going through his initial URL run, right, they really wanted to battle him. And he kind of played all of them. Now he's battled 2 of them by now with John and Suge, right? But he was like, I'm not battling you now. What does it do for me, right? And kind of downplaying it when his stock was at an all-time high. And whether people liked it or not, he had the ability to kind of pick and choose his plates more because he was the number 1 draw. And he's still number 1 draw is a lot, right? But momentum-wise, his draw was up there with some of the best. And it still is, but obviously he's been susceptible to more losses, right? That's why he's taking a John or a Suge, who I don't think he planned on taking if he had just kept winning, right? So now Easy talks about how he's open to the DNA battle, and I think it's something that will get done eventually. There's enough talking back and forth before. I think it would be a good matchup. They're both well-rounded battlers. It would be a very angle-based battle. I know DNA said, because some of you care about this, to me, just you do what you got to do to win, but DNA said there would be no Remy bars, right? So maybe he'd go even more directly at the character of Easy, even though I think a lot of people have. I think DNA has a different way of going about it. I think he's an extremely underrated angler more than anything. That's the thing he was best at before his break last year in 2024. The only reason it's not higher on the list is because he now is returning the favor. Oh, you didn't want to battle me when it was beneficial for you. Why would I give my return look? Then I'm probably going to have the most momentum, the most in a minute where people are extremely excited to see DNA. Why would I share that spotlight with you and give you that opportunity to benefit from my return? I understand it. It's a little petty, but petty is part of the sport, and it's just returning energy from what Easy did to him a couple of years back. So I think DNA and Easy is a great battle. I think it would be more than worthwhile for his return as well, but I understand his reasoning of saying no, and until that changes, I just think there's a couple other matchups that might make more sense from him. And then we get into the top 3 on the list, right? And at number 3, it's funny because I don't think that this will happen. I think this is a reach of a battle in terms of the circumstances lining up, but DNA has talked so much about there's only a few matchups, like there's 1 or 2 matchups that he really wants a legend that can match him brand-wise and kind of make it a bit of a mega match on his return. He says he'd love to give a shot, but there's not too many new stars out there to do it for outside of maybe an Easy to Block Captain, but we just discussed why that won't be happening or at the moment won't be happening for his return. So what legends can kind of match where it's DNA's return, but it's also a big brand on the other side of it? And one that I think stylistically makes sense, even though it's been a while since we've heard from him, is DNA versus Iron Solomon. Now, it's Iron Solomon, right? So and maybe a lot of people haven't thought of this, and that's because Iron has been so out of the way for a minute too. And when he talks on him returning to Battle Rap, the few times he'll pop out and speak on it, he's very particular. Geechee, Tay-Rock, right? It's really those 2 names. Danny Myers, maybe it's been a short list of names, but I think maybe the return of DNA is something where that's another legend that Iron also hasn't battled, and they could potentially have a good conversation there. Now, for all I know, like, Iron may never come back to Battle Rap because once he's been gone, it feels like he's been gone for a minute. And when he left after, took his break after the Mook battle, you just didn't hear from him. When he was back, he was extremely active. He takes a break. He's a guy that when he's away, he's all the way away, So it could be a little bit of like reaching out there maybe, but I think stylistically, you guys can understand why a DNA and an iron is great. I think they're great at similar things, both extremely layered pens. They apply that to their angling. Their straight wrapping ability is good. I don't think either of them have ever been high in the believability charts, which matters heavy to some people, right? But that makes their matchup even make more sense. So I think style-wise, DNA and iron would be great. I think it would be a great battle. And if DNA wants to return to an opponent that makes the matchup big, it's just good business for both sides. I think it makes sense. It's worthwhile for Iron's return to be versus DNA's return, and it's worthwhile for DNA's return to be against Iron's return. Like I said, we're talking about 2 returns here, so it becomes maybe a little bit more in fantasy land. Obviously, it might be harder to pull off than some of these other matchups, but when DNA is speaking on wanting a legend aside from him right now in his return and something that will mean something, DNA and Iron both returning would definitely be a splash matchup for all of Battle Rap. And as for the top 2 matchups, these are the most realistic to me. I've given kind of my options. It was hard for me to create this 5, right? But these 2 are a mix. They're 2 different directions, but I think both would be the most realistic to happen in a sense, right? And at number 2, it's actually the matchup that DNA himself said this is the only return matchup that would make sense for me, and that is Loaded Lux. DNA versus Loaded Lux, which was the topic of conversation for him shortly before he took his break, right? Where before Nitty and Lux got locked in, there was this war it wasn't that long ago, so most should remember, but everyone was kind of like campaigning in a sense for the Lux plate, or at least there was a lot of names thrown in. It was Nitty, right? DNA obviously had been asking for the plate for a minute, and it felt like that's possibly what could happen next. Then the Jerry West loss happened. I feel like that actually plays a big portion into how Nitty and Lux happens. I think if DNA handles business versus Jerry West, there's a good chance that we just get DNA versus Loaded Lux at the time, right? Then Hitman came into the conversation and people wanted that matchup. And it feels like DNA is always like the Lux plate is truly the end game for him. Everything he's kind of worked up to has worked up to that. He campaigned heavily for the plate, right? And the only reason it's not at number 1 is because I'm not mad at seeing the matchup. I even said there's just other matchups I wanted to see first. I thought Nitty versus Lux was a better matchup that people wanted a bit more, and it obviously played out to be an incredible classic battle. And then even Hitman, the second he jumped in, the people wanted that energy a bit more, and that's kind of been the issue with DNA and Lux is there any question if DNA's earned Lux? Absolutely not. It's beyond deserving earning. Like, that's not even something we talk about with DNA, really, with any of these plates. It makes sense. The storyline is even there. There just hasn't been the natural demand from the fans. And it's actually to the point that when DNA and Lux got brought up or campaigned for, you have people that kind of spoke down on it. And even myself, to a sense, I got to say I was guilty where I'm just not super bought into the matchup. Now, I haven't been as slanderous about it as some other people have. And I think that in part, kind of people being so almost against DNA and Lux just simply for not liking the matchup, kind of probably was disheartening to DNA. And I never spoke to the man, so I can't speak for his thought process, but I would bet that kind of the reaction the community gave him, where he's given all this. I mean, he's one of the most active legends ever, extremely high win percentage, one of the most viewed of all time. For people to be like, ugh, DNA and Lux, I think he took that as a bit of disrespect, and it probably played a factor into the break that he took from Battle Rap. So, but there has to be that natural demand. Now, I think it's more realistic now because some of the matchups kind of gotten out, the Nitty matchup got out the way, right? And then with Hitman, he still has other big matchups, because even though I personally want Hitman and Lux next for Hitman, I'm kind of in the minority. People are really either thinking Mook or Twerk. Not that the Lux and Hitman matchup is completely out of the way, but it's opening the door where if Lux wants to battle again and Hitman's not going to be his next matchup, he said he wants Mook to catch that fade first. Now it opens the doors where who really would go over DNA? You're now competing with Danny or JC, and especially on the return, I think DNA, it's a much more profitable matchup for a league. I think it makes more sense. There's more of like a buzz to it. Some may still want the pen route with Danny or JC, but considering Lux just battled a pen, an EFB pen at that, with Rum Nitty, and it was like the peak of all, like I can't see any of those other matchups being better in result than that matchup. It opens the doors where DNA and Lux makes a lot more sense. The last part, though, is just that Lux himself has seemed so disinterested, where he said he really doesn't want to battle DNA. And it seemed like it was still lining up to happen just because it's almost like a seniority with how long DNA's been around that he just should get the matchup and they'd get it out the way. Maybe there's this refresher after the break that makes Lux a little bit more motivated or just open to taking the matchup, because I still think it's a good battle. To battle, I'd have DNA winning, and I've always kind of felt that way as well. But it's a matter of the demand being there. It wasn't there at the time, to the point it was even a little bit poisonous from the fan base. They kind of pushed against it. Maybe that's different now, and especially if it's unfair to DNA that he doesn't simply say, I want Lux, and with the work he's put in, that should be championed into the spot, but it has to make sense. The people have to want it. I just don't know where the noise is exactly on that right now. I think it will be more positive than before, but it becomes a complex situation. It's not just simply he comes back and gets Lux. Both sides have to want to do it, and then there has to be demand to want to make it happen, which is why I have it at number 2, but I would be completely understanding, and the man is more than deserving of having that matchup on his return if he feels like it. And that leaves me with the number 1 matchup, which has its own kind of flaws here in a sense, because I think this battler has to make it make sense. I don't think if DNA returned next month, he's not gonna, but if he did, I don't think it would be this battle. But I think DNA versus Yunus, if we're talking about him saying he wants to give a new star a shot on the return, but it has to be beneficial, that star has to be there yet, I think Yunus, style-wise, it makes sense. I think that they could have, similar to Iron and DNA, it's not based on the straight believability in a sense, right? I think that Yunus has that pen-based, growing to be more of an all-around skill set. I think their styles would mesh well, and I think it is out of the new class. He is the face of the new school. He's the leader of the new class at the moment. And it would make the most sense if any new guy is going to do it, it would be Yunus. But I think that he's a couple matchups away from fully making it make sense. And with DNA kind of speaking on if he is going to return, it would be later in the year, it seems like. Maybe Yunus gets there by then. Maybe he gets that big stage played out the way that we want to see, that Gnome or SM, where he proves he can do it in front of 600 plus and rock a big building, right? Maybe he gets a couple more wins versus top tiers and just makes it so cemented that now it's not just purely giving Yunus a shot. Yunus has more of a starish buzz. So when DNA returns to battle a new guy, which is something he said he'd want to do, no one's there yet. Maybe Yunus will be there yet. And then I think it's a little bit more realistic. It doesn't have the politics and things lining up on every side like a Loaded Lux battle does. Because, God, it is such a headache behind the scenes. You're competing against other people that treat it like an end game. And the money that goes into it, it's just more difficult. While if Yunus grows to be the star that I think that he could be, then it makes sense on both sides. It's as beneficial for DNA as it is for Yunus. Style-wise, I think it makes sense. They were yapping at each other, and even today in the space, Yunus got up there and was yapping with him a little bit. I just think he has to make it make sense a little bit more, and for me, if he was the next star, and we're seeing Yunus versus all these top tiers, him versus DNA is a no-brainer, and I think it would be a fantastic and much more realistic concrete matchup that could be put together and make DNA's return worthwhile as well. And that is my full thoughts here on the 5 matchups for DNA. So like I said, when you start with those bottom 3, Swamp, easy, which I think will be higher for some people, understandable. It's just that he said he's not going to do it for the return, right? Iron, Solomon, I think those are all good matchups. I don't know if they make the most sense, if they're the most realistic, but I think they would be good. And then you get to Loaded Lux and Yunus, where it's giving the shot as opposed to your end game, top tier, god tier plate, right? And it's 2 different avenues to look at it, but I'm just painting the picture because nothing is perfect in battle rap, right? I just gave kind of 3 or 4 different complex reasons that why DNA and Lux didn't go down before, and why, even though it's more realistic, it still could possibly not go down now. And on the flip side, even though Yunus is not quite there yet, it's something that you've just seen this progression, DNA being the PG killer. If Yunus was to be a new star, to me, he's got star potential, but if he was to become the star, it just makes that much more sense. But I want to hear your guys' opinions in the comments down below. Who do you think is the best return battle for DNA? This one is not where, even though I have Yunus at 1, I think that's definitively the best return right now. I've kind of explained why it isn't. So it's a much more difficult one, and if you can give a pick, give a little bit of your logic of why the return battle would make sense. Maybe you won't go into the X's and O's and the behind the scenes and all that as much as me, even if it's just style-wise. Tell me who you think would be the best to welcome him back, because he's a legend of legends. He is a top 10 battle rapper of all time, one of the most active, one of the most viewed, and then outside of the ring is extremely respected, and something he said that I've always agreed with DNA. I don't agree with everything DNA says, but something I've always agreed is how he gets so much much love and respect outside of battle rap sometimes compared to within battle rap. I know it's funny to joke on DNA. Early in his career, I mean, they were killing DNA. You know what I'm saying? It's a guy that was kind of forged in fire. And even to this day, that stigma stays with him sometimes, even where a bar like Gary gets over and it's a moment that damn near wins a guy a battle, right? However, he is still up there with the gods in terms of the work ethic, the resume, the wins, and outside of battle rap, the eyes that he's able to bring in. He's actually, for all we know, with especially the work he's done with wrestling outside of battle rap, the success with his podcast, just all the networks that he touches, he might even be one of the bigger draws, especially with the return energy coming back, and he hasn't been around in a minute. I think it's an interesting topic, but what I know for a fact, no matter who we pick, is that the sport is better if DNA is going to be active and battling within it. So that's just my thoughts, man. Like I said, let me know yours in the comments down below and who you would want to see him battle again next. But it's been J Smo Reviews again here, y'all. Like, comment, subscribe. I'm going to catch you on the next one, man. Peace.